Hi, I've been brought out of retirement by you-know-who. I've always had an interest in the Prohibition era in the States, so let's look together and find out what you need to know about it. First, let's look at its origins. By the turn of the 20th century, there were several societies in America who had begun to warn others about the effects of alcohol, and as early as 1826 the American Temperance Society was founded to persuade people to abstain from drinking. You will remember that many religious groups had sought freedom from persecution by migrating to America. A little later, the Women's Christian Temperance Union pledged to ban alcohol and to improve public morals. Women were strongly behind temperance because they were worried that alcohol could destroy families and marriages. To begin with these two protest groups, basically, nothing happened, and what they needed was some political clout, and this came with the Anti-Saloon League, formed in 1893. Again, a group of people, but this time it became a powerful political force in the passing of a national ban on alcohol. Between 1905 and 1915, steadily across the nation, states brought in legislation to prohibit the manufacture and sale of alcohol. So this was done steadily. But it didn't stop there, however, and there was a move by the temperance societies to push for change, and this is what happened. This is what brought in the Prohibition legislation. Hurried through Congress, and as you will know, it brought in the Volstead Act in 1919. This essentially prohibited intoxicating liquor. It became illegal to manufacture, store in barrels or bottles, transport, sell, or possess or consume alcohol. So let's look at the legislation and let's see whether or not it was effective. Well, to begin with, it was quite successful. Liquor consumption dropped, arrests for drunkenness fell, and the price for illegal alcohol arose so high that the average worker could hardly afford it. Alcohol consumption dropped by 30%, and the United States Brewers Association admitted that the consumption of hard liquor like whiskey, that was 50% lower during this first phase of prohibition. However, the desire of those wanting a dry America was not to be easily lost, and it was matched only by the inventiveness of those who wanted to keep drinking. Enforcing prohibition proved to be extremely difficult. The illegal production and distribution of liquor, known as bootlegging, continued. It grew and grew, and the national government didn't seem to have the desire or the means to enforce the law. There were many unintended consequences as well. Restaurants went out of business to be replaced by speakeasies, and it's estimated that there were over 25,000 speakeasies in New York alone, each contributing money in order to be able to run to gangs $400 a month. Police and city officials were forced to turn a blind eye bribery and corruption became commonplace, and crime generally increased, as did things like the murder rate up 33%, and the arrival of a large number of gangsters taking opportunities. A good example being Al Capone. He made a fortune. It's estimated he was making $60 million a year. There were some 1,500 prohibition officers employed to try and enforce the law, but it was a tall order to cover 3.5 million square miles. It was not a safe job either. 30 enforcers killed in the first year, and their pay rate was worse than that of the rubbish collectors. National records show that a third of illicit alcohol was passed back, passed back to the bootleggers. There was no will or means to implement the law. The high price of bootleg liquor actually meant that the nation's working class and poor couldn't afford it, and so they actually missed out on what the middle and upper class could afford. People tried to produce their own liquor, known as moonshine, but were not always successful, and there were many people poisoned by it. There were many loopholes too in the law. For example, some doctors got rich because they were allowed to prescribe whiskey if it was thought necessary for someone's health. The churches could purchase wine for communion, and strangely the amount purchased each year showed a significant growth. And government officials turned a blind eye to imports from Canada because simply the boundary between the countries was so big it could not be fully covered. And so we come to the end. There was a little ditty produced at the time. Prohibition is an awful flop. It can't stop what it's meant to stop. It left a trail of graft and slime. It filled our land with vice and crime. It don't prohibit worth a dime. The legislation was finally repealed in 1933. Why? It wasn't working. The temperance movements had become extreme and lost members, so there was less pressure there. The amount of crime, the prisons were full, there was nowhere to put the criminals, and the Depression had hit America very hard. Legal alcohol could create much wanted jobs. So there we have it. I'll leave the decision on whether it's to be a 4-mark or 8-mark question to you know who, but I hope you found this useful. May see you again.